So today we're gonna be doing HTML. Hi Ricardo.
Good day, everyone. Sorry, apologize about my
No
delay.
worries. No worries. Are you okay? Cool.
Yes, all good, Just busy.
Right. So today we will be doing HTML and CSS part 2. So I kind of assumed there was part 1, right? So you guys already know something about HTML and CSS. How comfortable are you with HTML and CSS? What have you done? Give me some like a quick intro. What do you know?
So I did a kind of a language, very basic. It has some, I don't know how you call it. You know, when you move the page, it kind of moves it, or I don't know what the technical term is, but it's quite basic, to be honest.
Okay,
we use deflected.
Sorry, you're really breaking off. I don't know if it's just me or your connection is not that good.
Yeah, I was not able to hear you well,
Yeah.
Thomas, so it might be your end. But yeah, basically we did cover the basics of HTML and CSS, and what Thomas was saying is that we actually went to work a little bit with Flex. Yeah, but we got the basics covered already.
Great. Okay. Cool. So you know some kind of HTML tags that are most used, I would say, yeah, and stuff like that. You know how to style some things. That's good. All right. Great. So today, this is like a quick summary of what we're gonna be looking at. I saw the other day. Here. This is better. So this is like a summary of what we will be doing today. Wireframes, transitions. So wireframes is kind of like a generic idea. I will show you. This is the first thing we'll be doing. Everything else you see in here is pretty much CSS and how CSS kind of interacts with HTML. So I would assume that up until now, whatever you were doing with CSS is very static. So you're creating grids, you know changing backgrounds, you're changing colors and stuff like that, fonts and stuff. It's very static. While transitions, transformations, and all these kind of things, they make the website a little bit more dynamic. Even though I know that we said before that you can't really make this website interactive without JavaScript, which is still kind of true because you can't really get anything from the website in CSS, but you can make things move, you can make them transform into something else, and so on. So you can make it a little bit more. It's more all this in CSS. It's more for the visual, so animations and making things grow and shrink and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So let's start with the wireframes. This is like a little questions that we can do at the end if you have some time. So what is wireframes? Wireframe design is the process of creating a preliminary visual guide of a potential website's framework. This document can then serve as a blueprint for the website team to expand upon. It's a nice summary. So basically, what is wireframe? If you imagine in architecture, if you imagine a blueprint where you can see the kind of like a top view of a building with all the walls and everything, that's pretty much what wireframe is for websites. So wireframe, what it should do and shouldn't do. What it should do is it should show you the kind of rough placement of all the elements on the page. And when I say elements, I don't necessarily mean HTML elements. I mean like visual elements. So it say you want to have like a full width picture on the website and on the top. So it should show that there should be a picture in here and there should be a list in here. But when you say list, it wouldn't show you like how the list should look like or anything like that. It would just show you basically a box and says there is a list. What it shouldn't do, it shouldn't be giving you any details about how things should look. It shouldn't be giving you precise pixel locations of everything or sizes or anything like that. It really is just kind of looking at the wireframe and saying, well, this is looking good enough from the designer point of view and from the developer point of view to be able to actually make this work. Why this is important, one of the things is that you can catch issues earlier, and from user experience especially, it's good because you can kind of identify first if some things would just not work well, or if you show a wireframe of something of a web page and you have a button somewhere we have a call to action button somewhere that is kind of hidden, you would be able to see that on the wireframe. So you can say, oh, we need to move these things around. And instead of moving everything in Photoshop or InVision or anywhere else, where it's already kind of, it's expensive because you need to move the whole design around. You just move boxes, and that's why it's good. It's kind of like a diagram. So if you look next, right, this is pretty much what we said. So this is kind of a wireframe that you could imagine. So this would be your, in a good process, this would be your first thing that you would see from a website. When somebody says, I want to make a website, this is what you would see. As you can see, you would have the basic elements. So you would have header. You see there is lorem ipsum, doesn't really matter what is in there. Even the styling is not correct, right? That will be on the design. That is, for now, you just see the boxes. So you see boxes, there are some buttons already. There is a list of something that you don't know what it is, but you know that there are basically 4 columns with some kind of content in them, and so on. Again, this might be going a little bit too far in a wireframe where you already have like these little menus and stuff. But what usually happens is that, what usually happens is that the way that designers work, they will first design the kind of shell of the web page. So what I mean by that is the header and the footer and content area, right? So that's the first thing that gets designed. So you would have this kind of more details in the header and footer, because they would be designed before. And then as you go through pages, they would use the same thing, and they would just put wireframe of just the content basically in every page. So you might see more details in here and in here just because it was designed before, because you first want to establish your shell, but you wouldn't see as much detail in here. So this is just one example of wireframe. Does it make sense so far? Yeah, everybody happy with that? There's another example. Sorry. Yeah. There's another example of wireframe. This is actually going even more granular, which is always good, where you get wireframes for like a UI elements, not necessarily full pages. So you can say, well, we want to have a breadcrumbs on our website or some kind of step process. So designer would give you something like this. He would say, well, this is roughly what I would like it to look like. Or search, I would want to have an input field and then a button in here, and so on and so on. So again, another example of wireframe. This kind of wireframe, I would say this one in the middle, is probably the kind of best of wireframe, right? You don't have any details, you don't have any text, nothing to distract you. You just have literally boxes. You know it's going to be an article. You know that it's going to have an image on the left-hand side, some kind of title, excerpt, and so on and so on and so on. So you can identify a lot of stuff from it. And then if you want to say, well, this kind of, which I assume is a social button or something like that. If this social button is more important for us, let's move it up here. And you don't really care about what it looks like or anything like that at this point. Yeah, so this is another example of wireframe. This is some kind of wireframe for lists and so on. I'll go here. There is some simple tools. I mean, you will find countless number of tools for these wireframes. This one is, what is this? I actually never seen this one before. So yeah, it gives you nice grid, and you can start placing things on the page as you would normally do when you're designing something. You can even do text like that. Yeah, so just okay, you can't do this. So if I try to recreate what we had there before, a page, an image on the left, some kind of title in here, and then text in here, and text underneath, and you have your wireframe. This is not necessarily a tool just for or kind of system just for designers, right? This can be also, and it depends on what kind of career path you choose. But if you go as a freelance, people will expect you to actually design something. And when I say that, what I mean is most of the time they will expect you to create wireframe for them, so lay out the page for them, and then use any kind of template or design resource that you can buy or download from online to actually apply it to that, right? So there are huge marketplaces online where you can actually download designs. You know, you literally download Photoshops and then you can play around with them. So you download designs of buttons and stuff like that, and then once you lay out your page, you can actually apply the design to it. So this would be good. This kind of wireframing is good for you to communicate your intentions as well. If you are more of a kind of jack of all trades, where you go in and you actually design the page as well, or whatever. So it really depends on your project. Right, so here we go. And right, how many times did you refactor your HTML? So this is kind of generic question. I can tell you from experience that if you don't have any kind of agreed layout beforehand, then you're just gonna be moving things all over the place all the time. And obviously from our point of view as a developer, it's not as easy as moving one box to another place. Like it can completely break your layout. It can completely break your flexbox or anything like that you do. So, you know, any kind of change in the layout will result in X amount of complexity. So having wireframes is a really good tool to refer to if you try to change something later, because you can kind of, you know, it was pre-agreed basically. If you don't have a clear understanding of how you need to structure your layout, you will waste your time. For refactoring HTML, rewriting in a CSS and CSS in general become a nightmare. True, the more refactoring you do, the more kind of moving and changing of requirements you do, the more complex your code will become. Now you might agree, you will say, well, every time we move something, we make sure that we remove all the old code and refactor the new one and so on. That will never happen, I can tell you that now. You can be as precise or as disciplined as you want, but it's just not going to happen, because usually when you start doing that, you will get down to the rabbit hole where you just start refactoring absolutely everything, and it's going to take you just basically rewrite everything, and it's going to take you, you know, twice that long than it should take you. So yeah, so taking the steps slowly and making sure that they are well understood by all the parties is really important. Development process, designing, framing, developing. This is a little bit confusing when I was reading it first time. Framing doesn't mean wireframing necessarily. So the wireframes are basically somewhere before even the designing. So is a part of designing. So when you're designing page, you will first wireframe it, then you will create the actual UI design, and then you go into framing, where you lay out the page as it was on the wireframe on your web page, with just boxes mainly, and then you go into developing of the actual pixel perfect designs. Here you go some tools: Photoshop, Sketch, Figma. You can use all these tools to wireframe or do some kind of designs. There are also really cool products out there where you can make your wireframe interactive. So you can literally do your wireframe, and then you can say, well, when I click on this, I want to go to the next page, or when I click on this, the other thing opens, or something like that. And one of them, if I remember correctly, is Axure. Let me just show you. Yeah, so this is one thing that I was working with in the past, and it was really useful. You'll have this kind of wireframing tool. I wonder if they have some. Yeah, so you can create the whole flow of the web page. So you create one wireframe by page, and then you show them how they should be connected. And you can also, you see, bridge the gap with development. So you can also set any kind of interactions or even styles in here, which is too much for wireframes. But yeah, there are basically whole-blown products where you can go from the very beginning of wireframing into all the way to design. This actually changed quite a lot since I've seen it last time, which is nice. Yeah, so there's a lot of different projects to help you with that. how to do that. So this is more about the framing. Now we are to the framing. So your wireframe and design has been done, and you want to lay out the page in the actual browser. So you can use different color for each level to separate visually. So if you look at this, for example, you can actually, when you're developing it, you can start putting a different colors around your elements just to see where they are. This is very good for debugging. So I think we touched on this before, where I was telling you, debugging is very important and you need to put console logs in JavaScript and so on. Obviously, in HTML and CSS, you don't have any console log. You can't really log anything out. But one thing you can do is just add borders to stuff. So if you're trying to create a layout on your web page, and you want to make sure that it actually behaves as you expect it to behave, then you can just give it borders, and it will be a very good tool to actually help you. So, for example, this menu, you might find out that you would expect to be like this, but you might find out that this blue rectangle goes all the way here. So you know that it's not something that you expected. So you will want to fix that. So it's really putting a colorful border or maybe even background on different elements, different like red background to something, is a very good tool to debug your HTML and CSS just to see if things are where you expect them to be. Wrapping your images just to kind of help with the layout, so you know exactly what it behaves, because images have different rules. Sometimes you will find out that when you just put image on the page, it will have like a 2 or 1 pixel margin from the bottom or whatever. So if you put it in the div, it will get rid of these kind of issues.
Is it a good practice? Is it a good practice to have every image wrapped into divs?
It depends. It depends on your project, but I would say most of the time that's what you would do. Yes, because like you can apply different layouts to the wrapper rather than to the image itself. So the image will just sit in the wrapper, and then you can just style this without actually playing around with the image, which has some advantages. For example, when you're trying to do a background, if you want the image to be kind of centered but going outside of the element, you can't really do that if you just do image. You need to put a wrapper in it and then just set the background on there. So there are different ways to do it, but I would say putting a wrapper around image is useful. There's going to be a lot of people, again, as many developers, that many opinions you will get. There's going to be a lot of people who will tell you that it's not performant or not necessary, but honestly, there is nothing wrong with adding more elements on the page. Like, I've been working on projects where we had thousands of images and each of them was wrapped in div, and it had absolutely no impact on performance. So I can't really say that I would agree with that. I would say, just wrap them if that works better for you, which I think it will. Group similar types of elements. Well, this is basically mainly when you do lists and stuff like that. So if you have a lot of same elements in the same place, then you would probably group them. And again, this is basically a wrapper, right? This could be even called cards wrapper. It just gives you a little bit more visibility in your code and in the console as well, and it will give you the opportunity to style it again, right? So if you have a lot of cards on the page and you want to make sure that they take up only, the whole thing takes up only that much space on the page, then you will wrap it in something and add styles to that, rather than trying to calculate where each card is at that particular moment. You would just add wrapper. So like this is all about wrappers, really. You're grouping something into a wrapper. Divide visually. Again, when you're laying out your page in the browser, you should be using all the tags that you have to your disposal, and make sure that they actually make sense visually as well in the code and on the in the browser. So if you have an article, make sure that you use the right the right tags. This is good for SEO as well. When actually robots go to your page and then try to scan your page and stuff, they will be looking for these tags. They will try to parse it even without them. But if you do this, you can then do some nifty things with it to actually get ahead of other people, let's say. Change flow direction. Well, this is good for example, if you say I have this column and then I have row in there, then the wrapper will basically change the direction of the child elements. You can then you could even do kind of conditionally, depending on the resolution of the computer or anything like that. It's basically just applications of your kind of laying out the page, right? So this is all good if you have a row of elements and you know that at some point you will need them in a column, then again put them in a wrapper and then you can play around with that, right? You already did flex, so you know that you can do flex direction and you can say, well, now I want it to be in the row, now I want it to be in a column. Emmet. I don't know if have you used Emmet before? I take it as a no. So Emmet is a ultra fast coding. You can basically write a lot of code in a short. When I say code, I mean HTML. A lot of code in a short time with Emmet. Emmet is something that you don't even know about it. It is kind of like a library, or let's say plugin, or whatever you want to call it, for text editors. I would say 99% of text editors will have Emmet included by default as you install it, because it's just been so widely used and it's quite useful. You will have it in there. So just to show you what Emmet actually is, instead of writing code here like this, if I want to write two divs, I will write. If I want to write like parent and child div, I will write div here, then I would go here and I will write another div like this. I could give it class, say, parent, and this is child. Yeah. So if you look at what I just did here and how long it took me, that's how you would write it normally, right? If you use Emmet, you can simplify it a lot. So if you do with Emmet, you just basically write div. I want it to be class parent, and then inside of it will be div class child, and then with tab you confirm it and it will create a markup for you. It's kind of like a magic. It works quite well with basic stuff. You can't use it for like crazy things, but there are some really cool things with it. So if I have you looking at here, so look at this item in the list. If you look up here, and this is VS Code, almost every editor has something similar. If you look up here, this looks a lot like Emmet, doesn't it? So this is exactly what Emmet what you can tell Emmet to create something. So if you look at here, we have HTML body, nav, ul, and lay. So if I try to create it in here, I would say HTML body, nav, ul, and lay. Right, confirm it, and you have this whole markup that you have in here. Now, obviously, where it gets a little bit smarter, you can see that we have actually how many? 1, 2, 3, 6 items in this list. You can do that as well with Emmet. So you could say.
Thomas, sorry. Can you screen? Can you try to?
Oh, sorry, it's too small.
Because I can't see.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
I forgot about that. Right, so is it better now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So as you can see, we have six items in this menu. So you can do that with Emmet as well. So if I go HTML body nav ly, and I would say I want this 6 times, you can do that, right? So now if I confirm that, look, it will create a six items in that list. If I go back and say, well, each of them has a link in it. I can do that as well. I can say there is a link in each of them. And look, you have link, you already have the main attribute in there, and so on. So it will let you to create, it can let you to create really cool stuff. I would even think that it will let you to create something like this. I didn't try this before, but I think it will. Yeah, look, so now I have 2 lists and 6 items in each. So, you know, these kind of things are really, I find myself Emmet very helpful when I don't actually work with any framework, right? Because frameworks, they usually will have something like loops. So, for example, AngularJS, if you want to have 6 items, you would do ng repeat, and then you would give it some kind of something, and it would make it 6 times basically. In React, the same thing. In React, you would actually have, because it's JSX, so you would actually have your loop. So you could say, you know, items map blah blah, and then you would just do this. So it would just loop through the items. So in those cases, I would say Emmet is not as useful. But if you just do static HTML, when you just get a template for HTML and you need to convert it into when you just get a design and you need to convert it into HTML, then it can get really, really useful. And as you progress, you will eventually look at page, and you will be able to see the elements, at least roughly, what is going to be on that page very quickly, right? So even without actually knowing yet, without actually coding it, you will look at page and you will say, okay, I know that I'm going to have header, I know I'm going to have nav. In the nav, I'm going to have this menu, so that definitely is going to be list. And then down here, I'm going to have some cards. I will have one row with bunch of cards, then I will have some title, and you will kind of already analyze it in your head without actually having to code anything, because you've been doing it for so many times. Sorry, you will already know kind of how to you know structure it. So in that case, Emmet will become very useful, because then you can literally just go and you can say, okay, I'm gonna have nav. And in it I'm gonna have a list. In it I'm gonna have three items, because it's my menu. And in each item I'm gonna have link. So that's what we did there. And then I'm gonna go down here and I'm gonna have body. And then not body, section. And I'm gonna have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections, let's say. So I'm gonna have section, 6 sections, and inside of them I'm gonna have, again, list of cards. So I will have div, and each of them will be a card, and in each of them is gonna be, let's say this will be 3 of them, and then inside of them we're gonna have article, and each article will have header, right? Something like that. And then it will create this whole markup for you without actually you having to write it out all. So that's really useful then, because you know, once you actually see the page in a kind of sense of HTML, it's gonna be quite useful. So that's Emmet. Does everybody understand what Emmet does?
Yeah, but it should be in HTML and in body, right?
Well, yes, it can be. I'm just not wanting to mess up this markup in here, but yeah, you would do it in here, yeah. Or wherever you need to, really. It doesn't have to be in, I mean, at first it will be in body, but then you can do Emmet inside of your div as well. So if you want to have another another paragraphs in here or something like that, then you can do that again. So yeah, wherever you need to add in your HTML. Does it make sense?
Yes, I used it before Emmet, but I doesn't know that it's Emmet.
Oh, you've been using it, yeah, yeah. I actually, to be honest, I until recently I didn't really was not really aware of Emmet per se. I've been using it as well, but I didn't actually realize it was a separate library. I thought it was just something that the editors did, but yeah, apparently it is a separate project that's been very widely used.
I wrote before a few landing pages with HTML and CSS, but it was a few years ago.
And did you use Emmet for that?
No, Emmet, I know that a few days ago, as Vessel told me about Emmet.
So do you think that now looking back, do you think it would save a lot of your time?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. For static pages, if you just converting PSDs into HTML, it would definitely. I mean, I know that when in those times it would save me a lot of time. So it's definitely good for some stuff. Right. Well, those were the examples really that we did. Pixel perfect. Oh, sorry. Content space. Oh, right. So this, I forgot about this project. There are so many kind of nifty tools out there to help you. So this is a tool, and it's just good to kind of mess about really, but it will give you two designs and it will ask you which one do you think is correct design. So this will kind of give you idea or test your really knowledge about what is considered a good design or not. So if you look at this page, what would you think is the good design?
The first one.
Well, you are a designer, so yeah. So the first one, because why would that be?
Because if you're looking on the top, on the header, you can see that Wi-Fi doesn't work in the right side.
Yeah.
And you can see Johnny Eve looks like not readable.
Yeah. So there's lots of stuff in here, right? So I mean, this is kind of very obvious one because you have horrible font, you have like not round avatar and so on, and for me as an engineer rather than designer, like this time is the thing that really triggers my buttons. Yeah, so you select which one do you think is right, and then you go next. You need to press this first, next, and then it will ask you. Is the most correct? It will ask you again.
It's a bit harder now. I guess I would go with number 2.
Do you think the number 2 is better one?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's try. Yep. I think it's mainly because of the font, because it's more readable, and I think the avatar has the circle, so it's easier to distinguish. Again, which one do you think is the best?
I would go with number 1.
Why?
Because the OK kind of bubble is in a better size. I don't know.
Yeah,
the size of the right one is a bit weird.
I think so as well. Yeah, I mean, there is no reason for this white space to be in here, so I think in this one. Yeah, so you can go really, really far with this tool. It will be asking you all sorts of stuff. So,
what do you think? The one I play with my kids, like the game of the 7 differences.
Yeah, I'm sure Christina will know this one.
Yeah.
I would say right. No.
This one.
Yeah.
What do you think, Ricardo? I think Ricardo is busy. Let's try. Yep. Yeah. So you have the link. I will send you the link anyway, but you will have it in the presentation as well. So if you because you don't have anything to do, so so you can go and play around with it for hours. Right. Let's move on. So now we're actually moving on to the CSS properties that we wanted to talk about today. So transform. Is everything clear until now? Because now we're gonna start doing code and everything. So is everything clear until now?
For me, yes.
Yeah, Thomas?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ricardo, are you here? Okay. So transform.
Yeah, I'm just mute because of the background noise, but yeah, all good.
All good? Cool. Right, so let's move to transform. The transform property provides you ability to visually manipulate an element by rotating, scaling, skewing, or translating. So what does that actually mean? When you look at element on a page, like here, this is what you would normally do to actually make box on the page, right? So if you look at the code, let me just close this. If you look at the code, you will have the box in here. If you look at your CSS, you'll see width and height 200 pixels. It has some kind of text in there as well, so you know it aligns and blah blah. So you have like a normal kind of box. Now, what if you would like to have the box looking kind of rotated or skewed or something like that? Normally, that kind of goes against what CSS and HTML is, right? Because CSS and HTML, they go by lines, right? So they render lines in a kind of grid. So you go rows and columns. But if you want something that it doesn't really fit a box, then you're kind of going outside of the rendering, the basic rendering engine. So a couple of years back, CSS and HTML, they started adding new things, new kind of tools to do that, and one of them is transform. And with transform, you can manipulate the element to whatever you would like. So in here, we say take the item, which you can see the class in here somewhere. See transform item. So that's our box, and it says on hover. This is just to show you the example. Rotate it by 90 degrees, right? So if I now hover over this element, it will rotate by 90 degrees. This is not really visible because only the text kind of rotated, because obviously it's a square. So you could just say, just to make it a little bit more obvious, we can add a border on one side. So let's see, border left, 2 pixels. Solid green. Actually, I'm not sure this is gonna even work. Let's see. Yeah, so you see now. Oh, that wasn't the best, right? So again, I'm adding something just to debug, right? So this is what we were talking about before. I'm adding border just to be able to see basically my changes. Now you can see that the border is on the left. If I hover over it, it will go on the top, because the whole element kind of transformed. It kind of switched. Rotated. To make it a little bit more obvious, I will turn on this transition, where we will talk about transitions in a second, where basically whatever you do to the element will happen over some time, so it will be slower, so you can actually see what's happening. So if I now hover, you'll see how it's actually rotating. This is pretty cool, isn't it? So you can do stuff with this. Again, keep in mind that most of these things that we talk about today are mainly for visual side of things, mainly for animations and pretty interactions and stuff like that. You can't really read values from it in CSS. Right?
And so if we go back to the HTML, and we're saying that box has the class transform item, or,
yes,
or the ID transform item somewhere.
Class.
Yeah. Oh yeah, div class. Yes, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So you give it a class, so you can target it, and then you can do basically whatever you want with it in the transform. Okay.
Now, what exactly is that transition doing?
It's rotating the box by 90 degrees.
So, okay, and that is activated after you click it, or whenever you load it?
It's on hover right now.
On hover, okay.
The reason why it's on hover is because this is the easiest way to achieve some kind of reaction to user's action in CSS, right? Hover is usually what you would use, because click is not necessarily, usually you would have to go to JavaScript and actually do something on click, like add event listener on click, and then you could add a new class to this to trigger something. But CSS has this hover where you can basically trigger stuff on user action. So this is what you usually use to just debug or just do an interaction without actually having to do JavaScript. So hover is quite useful. There are a couple of, I'm sure that you already did some of these, but on links you can use active and focused and stuff like that. But so hover is one of those.
If we were to, I guess just comparing add even listeners and this kind of hover or I guess click that you can do with CSS, would the CSS script only be limited to design and add even listeners could do more? So for example, can we do things on the CSS that we can actually already do on add even listeners?
No, you can't. So your CSS would be limited by just UI, right? So CSS is just for the rendering.
Okay.
So it kind of goes like, if you need something just visually, you can do it in CSS. If you need actually something to happen, then you need to go to JavaScript. So there are cases. There are cases where you actually you cannot use hover. You know, sometimes, and I kind of think of example right now, but sometimes you can't use hover. You actually need to go to JavaScript and specifically say, okay, I want something to happen when my mouse goes over this element, you know, and stuff like that. So, so hover is the kind of basic like UI interaction. If you want something smarter, then you need to go to JavaScript. Right. So now all these, I will just show you quickly. They are basically different things that you can do with transform. Before we go there, again, and I told you, I think we had this lesson together. Read the documentation, the most important thing. Like whatever I can show you in here will never be as thorough as documentation. So if you are really interested in transforms, what you can do with it, just go online. I recommend MDN, search for transform, and they will have all the documentation you need. So it will show you everything you can do. You can do matrix, translate, scale, all the things that you can do, right? These are all the properties that you can do with transform.
What makes MDN one of the first places that you guys are looking for reference all the time?
MDN is maintained by Mozilla, and Mozilla is basically who creates most of these standards, right? So they have very big say in all these standards. So their documentation is usually the best. It's very thorough. It's really well explained, and you can find things in here that that are kind of coming up. They are not necessarily existing yet in browsers or something like that. There is W3C or other stuff that you can go to, but I had issues with them in the past where they were showing you things that are already deprecated, or they were showing you things that are already in the browsers, but they didn't update their documentation and so on. MDN to me is the best resource online. It also gives you all these kind of alerts whenever you see red, yellow box or whatever on MDN. You need that is quite important to pay attention to, and also accessibility. So MDN has a lot of stuff about accessibility and other things that you could think of, while W3C doesn't. So they will give you the documentation for everything that you need to know about that particular function or element or whatever, and they will give you some more stuff, like kind of almost like a philosophical stuff. They will tell you, you can use this, but please think about accessibility. You know, so they are a little bit more involved, which I like. And honestly, if I look at W3C, I think W3C is cool. And maybe this is just me because I'm looking at it almost every day. If I look at this, I find it quite hard to read comparing to this. This just seems to me much better. So yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So again, going back to this, I will show you all these. We will talk about it, but go and read the docs. That's the best thing you can do. If you think like, oh, could I actually skew, because we don't have skew in here, could I actually skew the element? The first thing to do, go on MDN or W3C or whatever and see if it actually is in the docs that you can do it, because you can. So just to show you a couple of transforms, this will rotate the element by X number of degrees. This is just a free number. You can put whatever you want in there. So if you want 38 degrees, it will transfer it by 38 degrees, right? the one thing to know about transform is, because you are not doing something that is kind of, let's say, normal in the rendering engine, these transforms are happening after the initial render. So what does that mean is, the page is rendered, and then this element will stay as it is. It will not re-render, let's say. I mean, obviously it re-renders, but it will stay as it is. And when you transform it, that's how it was. It will just shift the element. So basically, imagine that you have a canvas that you are painting on, and when you transform it, the whole canvas kind of shifts like this. It doesn't actually do anything to the thing inside. So that means if you look very closely, and I will try to zoom this in, if you look very closely on the text inside of the element, and if I transform it now, you can barely see that, but you can kind of see how rough, let's say, the text becomes, because it doesn't re-render the text to make it nice and round and stuff like that. It will just shift it by a couple of pixels. And also, what I just did there, when I select the text, look, it doesn't select the text. It selects it kind of this way, because it just transformed the whole thing that way. So yeah, when you do transforms, you just need to realize that it's not gonna actually do anything to the element. It will just take it as it is and transform it the way that you want, if that makes any sense. You will the more exercises and stuff you do, you will understand this more. But it is one thing that you need to kind of keep in mind, that you are not, you kind of taking what was there in the context and just manipulating it somehow without actually completely re-rendering it. The one thing that, if somebody can spot this, look, if I hover over this part of the box, look what's happening. Right? Can somebody tell me what is happening now? Why is it so? Why is it doing these crazy things? I'm trying to find out if I can.
Is the element moving? So that as it moves, actually it comes down. So basically, as it moves, it's no longer hovering because you're no longer on the
exactly.
element.
Yes, exactly. So you see, like, because we are kind of rotating the element. When I point at this corner, the corner goes away. So I'm not hovering anymore. So it's kind of doing this crazy thing. So you need to be careful about that as well. Basically, you need to understand that if you do use hover, which is just the basic CSS that you can't do anything with, right? It's a hover. You cannot change the behavior of hover or something like that. If you use that, then you need to understand that there are kind of limitations like this, that this could happen. In JavaScript, in JavaScript, you have much more control over this. You could say, well, we could run this transform when I'm pointing at the element minus some pixels, so you can extend the area or something. You can change the behavior of hover, but on CSS you can't. It's just hover. Right. So now if you can do rotate X, which is just rotating on one axis. So it will rotate, just on X, which in this case it looks like it's basically making it smaller. If you can rotate it on two different axes as well. So there you go. So it's basically kind of skewing it. And in here you can see that effect that I showed you with the text much more, right? So if you look at the text is not kind of, staying the same one. It's skewing with the element. So if you imagine that you have an article and you do this transform on, it's going to be kind of unreadable, right? So you need to think about it as well. And here we go, rotate Y, so it does that. Then we have translate. Translate, it basically moves the element. So it says, well, this is the element, and then take it and translate it, which basically means change the position of it by some means. So in this case, we're saying move it 50% to some place, right? So this is what it looks like. Again, the same thing. because it's moving. If I point in here and it goes away, then I'm not kind of hovering it anymore over it. So you need to be very careful about that. You can use different units. So in this case, we're using 50%. You can use EMs, you can use pixels. It's just CSS, so all these kind of values are interchangeable with anything you want. You can even do, in here we did 50%, and you can say 2EM in the other direction. So it will translate it 50% and 2EM. So 50% to the right and 2EM to the bottom. All right, so you can do whatever combinations you can think of. Scale, as it might suggest, it will change the size of the element. So if I point at it now, it will increase the size. Again, it's stretching the font as well. If the font is not staying the same, because this at this point is just a snapshot of the visual representation, and it will take the whole thing and stretch it out. So it's not gonna keep the dimensions of whatever you have inside of it, which you might expect sometimes. You can scale it only on one axis again. So you go X. You can do Y. There's and this one. So again, perspective, we haven't seen that yet, but then you have rotate as well. Now, the most important thing about this is, you see it's changing in different ways. The most important thing about this to know is that you can chain them as much as you want. So you can put more of them in one line, right? So you can have multiple transforms at the same time. Because obviously, if you would do this, and you already know this, but if you would do this, then this line in CSS would override this line. So it wouldn't actually do the perspective, right? So if I do this, you see it just does this. It just changes on the Y, but it doesn't do the perspective. So thankfully, CSS lets us chain stuff. So you can put more transforms into one line, and then it will do all these transforms. You should be able to even do, translate if you want to. I think you should be able to do that. Yeah, so you see it kind of goes into perspective, changes on Y, and moves a little bit down and to the right. So we can really do a lot of stuff with it. Yeah, look how crazy it goes. Yeah, so that's transform. What do you think about transform? Do you understand how it works?
Yes, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. I would say, the good thing about CSS and these new, well, I say new, but because I'm, at this quite a long time already, but they are not that new. But the good thing about these they are so basic. They are not that hard to understand. There's a lot of the times you will find people trying to read too much into it, but they just not, they are just not that complex because it's just CSS, right? CSS needs to be kept very simple. So, it literally is just rotating something or translating or whatever. And you can get some cool effects from it. These things, for example, the last application I've been doing with this is really useful for cards, right? So you can do animation of cards. So when you take card from a deck and you put it on the page, you can do that with transform without actually having to do some crazy 2D library or something like that. You can do that with CSS. So they are very useful but I would say try to keep it sensible as well, because once you start doing crazy transform on the web page, nobody really likes that. I think most research points at that like static websites are much more user friendly, and they are more appreciated than where things are flying around and moving out of your mouse pointer and stuff like that. These things are really, really good for web applications, or when you do like a very interactive kind of showcases of something. Right. That was transform. I don't know if we have something. These are the most popular ones. I mean, that's you can find all these in documentation. Yeah, this is basically what we were just talking about. And you can see there are some websites that will give you I suppose, yeah, they will explain more into how it works and how can you use it, and all sorts of documentation. These websites are quite useful because you can change it directly in there, so you can kind of play around with it to see what you can do. You can actually achieve even like a 3D 3D room or whatever it is. Yeah. Transition. So do you want me to talk more about transform, or you are okay with it and let's move to transition?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Very good. Yeah, cool. Transition. Transition allows you to change values smoothly instead of having property changes immediately. So we have actually done that already. So in our transform, when I show you these examples, you see how smoothly this happens. That's because I have added transition on this item. So that means whatever you change with this item, it will change smoothly, right? So if I remove this, then you will see that it will still change. Oh, well, actually this one, not this one. Oh. It will still change, but it will kind of just jump, right? And this is, again, like, this will kind of get rid of the hover problem because you're jumping, right? You're not actually smoothly transitioning. So it depends on your application, obviously, if you want to use just kind of jumping effect or if you want to use the transition, but this is what we did here. Some more transitions, I think, to show. Yeah, so in here, just to show you a couple of them, we can say we want to let's go back to the code, look at the transition. So the same thing, we have one box and we have transition class on it, transition item, so we can control it from CSS. And in CSS, we say anything that happens to this box, any change that happens to this box, transition it. The duration is 0.5 seconds, and this is the kind of timing function, the linear function, the line across which the transition happens. So we're saying just ease it in this effect basically. So if you look at it now, you see it will change its height, which we set in here. So on hover, change its height by not by 300 pixels. Okay, so it will go from its initial state to this. If I turn off the transition, the height will still happen, but it will jump. So if you look at it now, see, it will change its height, but it will jump instead of actually transitioning. You can transition anything you like. So what we just did with the transform, right? So we did rotate minus 45 degrees. You can transition transforms. You can transition even background colors, which is quite impressive if you think about it. So if you have blue color and you transition it into purple, so this will actually give you what the CSS does of the background. It will calculate the differences in colors between whatever the color is and the purple, and it will slowly transition to it. If I increase this to 3.5 seconds, then you will see that it will slowly transition to that color. And this is already quite cool effect that you can do with it, because it will give you all the colors in between as well. So that's quite nice. Usually the transition...
So that color transition, it's line 103. Just by hovering, it will change the color to the 720155.
Yes. So yes. So if you look at this class, this is our element, and also it has another class which is box, right? So if you look at the box, you will see you will see that the initial color is this. That's the blue one that we see in here. And then we say that transition item on hover should change to this color. You don't need to tell the CSS anything else. You will just say, I want it to be this color. So if we stop the transition, if we disable the transition and go back here, it will go from blue to purple. right? I'm sure you've done this already. On hover, it will just do something, right? Now, to make it a little bit more appealing, let's say, you can do transition, where you just say, you know, change with some kind of, not delay, but over time. So it does the transition, and it looks a little bit smoother. Usually you will have the transitions quite snappy, just to make it, you know, because they need to be very, you know, they shouldn't be really catching the eye of user. It's there just for the nice look. So if you have a button, for example, then you would do something like this. And it's much nicer than actually doing without transition, where it just kind of jumps at you, right? So the nice thing about how the CSS is handling, how they define this, is that you don't have to do anything special in the final state that you want it to be. So I can say in here, once I actually hover over this element, I want it to be height 300 pixels. I want it to be rotated, and I want it to change color. And this, as you can see, this is all just a basic CSS. There is nothing special about this. So if I now hover over this element, it will be 300 pixels, it will rotate, and it will change color. Look, see? It's a completely different thing, right? So it is just CSS. Now, all I have to do, if I want to, I can, to the basic element, I can say, whatever changes on that element, if the styles to that element change at any point, then transition into those changes. Okay, so if I go back and I point at it, it will transition into it. It will do the same thing as it did before, but it will do it slowly over time.
Now, if you have a different effect, and I'm not sure if you can have something else than hover. I'm looking at line 103. Let's say that you have another effect that is going to be transition, dash, item, semicolon, something else.
Mm-hmm.
That means that whatever that something else happens, if it's not hovering, it's something else. But it will still transition to that, because the transition is actually applied to line 97, which is the transition item.
Yes.
Okay, and other than is, transition 0.2 s is, what can else be instead of is?
Aha, so that's your timing function. There is many things that you can put in there. And again, I would encourage you, just go here and do transition. And you can read all of these, because I don't remember them out of my, from my head, but you can actually see. So you can have ease in out, you can have ease out, you can even do, so you can, there are some predefined ones. Let me just show you. There are some predefined ones, and then there is one which you can just define your own, right? So you have linear ease in steps. I don't know if they are, yeah, so this is everything that you can put in there. Now, this one is probably the most important if you want to do something out of ordinary. So, not sure, I don't know how much you know about animations, but you can actually do very custom kind of easing with the Bezier lines. So there are tools for this. Again, there are tools for everything. This is a line of animation, right? If we say this is our line of animation, this is linear. So it will go from point A to point B linearly. It's not going to do anything, right? If you can take this, you can take each of these points and you can set it to somehow. So you can say, look, I want this kind of animation. And then what that means is it will go slower over time, and then a little bit quicker, and then a little bit slower again, or whatever it means. So if you can even see the preview in here. Look at this, what is it, pink box. You see? So you can define, this is linear, and this just goes straight. So you can define whatever easing you want in your transition. There are predefined, again, as I said, there are predefined ones. Most of the times I would say you're going to be using these ones, only if you have really animations, not I haven't seen it much with transitions, but if you have animations, you might use these ones just to do something very, very custom. But these ones are all the ones that you can use. Steps is interesting one because it basically, what that means is doesn't necessarily animate. It will go just step by step through the animation. So if I can show you, let's do like 5 seconds, and then we can say step, and let's put 10 steps in there from the start. Okay, so if we do this, then this change will go in 10. It will happen in 10 steps over this time. So let's try it. Well, this is already on load of the page. It is already doing the transition because we said it will be on this item in general. So now if I point at it, look, it goes and it changes to the final result that we defined in steps, and then back again. Okay, so there's many things you can do with that. These are all the ones. If none of these will satisfy you, then you have this one where you can define basically anything you want. Okay. Yeah, so that's transition is. That's what it is. You just define that the changes to the element should happen over time rather than instantly. Let me see what is in here. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention. With the transition, you have this is basically the full command where you say what is you can define only the property that should be transitioned as well. Over what time it happens, what is the timing function, and what is the delay as well. So let's play with that a little bit as well. In here we're saying that the transition to that element should happen only to height of the element. So if we have these three defined, we're saying the height should change, it should transform, and it should change the background color. What you should see is that the height will animate, let's say it will happen over time, and these two will happen instantly. So let's see if that actually works. Let me just put this on off for now. So if we do that, you'll see that the height is changing slowly, while the transform and the color happen instantly. The same thing we can do with just transform. So if we put transform in here, height and background color will change instantly, and transform will happen over time. See? So you can define what actually is transitioning. I would say most of the time you will probably want to transition everything, but that's not necessarily true as well. But most of the time, I would say. The duration we already played around with that, with the 5 seconds and stuff. The timing we played around with that as well. Delay, you can delay the let's say animation, the whole transition. So if we delay it by half a second, you'll see that nothing happens for half a second when I point at it, and then it will transition. So that's also good sometimes when you want to actually postpone the delay. This could happen, if you don't want this kind of like flickering and stuff like that. If it's on hover, you want it to happen actually when people really stay on that element. Sometimes it's useful, especially when it's smaller times. So if I just kind of, let me just do a little bit bigger. If I just kind of point at the element and point away, nothing is going to happen. You see, if I just kind of go around it like that, if you actually stay on the element, then it's going to transition. So that could be one application. Yeah, so the transition property, transition command, has all these things that you can define in there. Or you can just use the abbreviation, because most of these have defaults. So I think the time is probably the only one that you need. So you can say, transition 1 second, and it will work as well. So by default, it will transition over 1 second. It will transition everything, and it will transition with ease or linear. I'm not actually 100% sure now which one is the default. I wonder if it's in here. So Oh no, not here. There is definitely in this documentation, I don't want to read through it now because we in this, but there will definitely be a default for what it is, and I think it's ease. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's ease. So if you just define this, then you see it will, oh, actually it might be linear. It will happen everything over 1 second without delay. You can then say, you know, we want it to be with ease in and out, let's say, and then it will happen like that. And then you say you want to delay it by 0.2 seconds, and you will get the delay. So it's only up to you how you actually construct this, but you can write it either like this, or you can actually write it out. So you can say transition delay 2 seconds, and you don't have to put it in here. And then nothing happens for 2 seconds, and then you there it is. And then nothing happens for 2 seconds, and then it's for transition. So you can actually write it out like that as well, but most of the time you will probably write it just in one line. Right, is there any questions about transitions? Oh, here are the different functions. Example. Right. Any questions about transitions? Does it make sense?
No questions.
How common you're using CSS in your job? I mean, is better using JavaScript, or you can use CSS plus JavaScript, or 50% CSS and 50% JavaScript? How common?
So again, it depends on application really, what you're working on. I have to say that, and to be completely honest, I don't use too much of transitions and animations and stuff like that, because they are really specific for, you know, animations and transitions. They are used either for a very kind of basic elements like loaders. So, you know, these days when you see a loader on a page, when it spins like this, these days you don't actually do it with image anymore, because images are expensive. You can do it with CSS, so you would do that, right, in CSS. But kind of animating normal elements on the page is not as common in, I would say, you know, 75% applications out there. So if you work on some web app and you're working for fintech or whatever you're working for, they don't use animations as much. So you will be using them for a very specific use cases, for a pretty websites where things should be moving, or for some showcases of something, or, you know, if you're creating like a promo website for new phone that comes out and you need the phone to kind of fly out from the side or something like that, for something like, you know, specific like that, then you use it a lot. In that case, you would use CSS rather than JavaScript. There are JavaScript libraries for animations, but the kind of norm is try to do it in CSS as much as you can, for multiple reasons. One is it's kind of solid, you know, like if you make it work in CSS, there is a very little chance that it's gonna break. While with JavaScript, if you're using some kind of animation library, there is a lot of things that could go wrong with the animation library. Like with any libraries, we talked about it as well. When you're using some third-party library, you know, you basically are at hands of someone who created it. You don't know what could break in there. While CSS is built into the browser, so there's not much that could go wrong with it. That being said, not every time you can recreate the kind of, you know, animation that designers requested by CSS, but a lot of times you can. I will show you the animations in a second. So the kind of general idea is try to do it with CSS. Try hard to do it with CSS. If you can, great. If you can't, then you will have to resort to go to JavaScript. If that answers your question.
Okay.
And also, and this is like not really for us, but like for you, Christina, for example, when you are a designer, and this is the important thing, why you designers should be working with developers, because developers will tell you this kind of stuff, right? Like if you want to put an animation on the page as a designer, it's really good, or I would say really important, to work with designers together, developers together, because then the developer will be able to tell you, well, you just can't animate this with CSS. I'm gonna have to do JavaScript, which means installing new library. It's gonna be bigger. It's gonna be more prone to error, and so on and so on and so on. And then designer can say, well, okay, how can I make it work only with CSS? And you can make a compromise where designer is happy with the animation, and you can do it in CSS. So that's why it's important for designers to know a little bit of CSS and work with developers kind of actively, which not always happens. You know, designers they tend to take everything away and then kind of drop ship everything at you, and you have to work with it somehow. So it's really nice if you join a company. It's really nice to see if designers working together with developers on a daily basis.
Yeah, I know, it's true. If I create something and I try to explain, developers, they don't understand what I want.
Yeah, exactly.
And we can't create like something like this. Why you can't do this? Why you can't create something like this? Or after that, I like to change something.
Yeah, I mean, it is really important. I've seen this on all the levels. It doesn't matter if you're working with a new team or if you're working with a very skilled team. I've seen it everywhere. If the designers don't work with developers, there are huge delays, because at the end of the day, developers will not want to implement stuff. And you should not be feeling like you need to implement everything if it doesn't make sense from development point of view. And I've been in situations where you create something. I mean, the designer will ask you to create something, and you know that if you do it that way, it's not going to be very easily maintainable. But if you do a little compromise, then you can maintain it better. It's going to be more reusable, and so on and so on and so on. So you as a developer, part of your job is also to what we call push back on designers and just say, like, look, if can we change this a little bit, because it would be better for us because of X and Y. So definitely these two professions should work together much more than they do, unfortunately.
And honestly, that's because we don't understand JavaScript at all.
Yeah.
So that's the problem.
That's fine. For designers not understanding JavaScript, I think that's fine. But I do think that designers should understand CSS inside out, I would say. I mean, it's a bit strange to say that, because obviously why would designers learn programming or whatever? But CSS is not really programming. CSS is just a styling language. And I think that in this time and age, they really should know that, because one, they will they will kind of get on better with developers, and the second thing is, just for your own good, like being able to design something that actually works well on the web, and knowing that is just, yeah, it's just, I think it's better. I think it's, as a professional, if I would be designer as a professional, I would want to know that, just because then I don't have to go and either listen to someone nagging at me, like saying, oh my God, they designed it, that doesn't work on the website or something like that. Or, just be able to kind of go and talk to these developers about something that I know that I'm talking about. So, yeah, I think CSS is quite important for designers, to be honest. Right. Any questions about transitions?
No. Okay.
No? Are you all with me still?
Yeah, I'm still on.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, it's quite
transitions make sense.
interesting. Yeah, it just feels like to me like it's. It's quite interesting. But I'm just wondering to what extent we're going to be using it. But I guess we'll see the exercises coming.
Right. I would say so. Transition. It is a little bit confusing, isn't it? So what to say about transition is, this line 99, that's all that transition is, right? Like, do not think about this thing at all. Just don't think about it for now. Transition, that's all it is. Transform is a little bit more complex because you can do more stuff with it. But with transition, what you're saying is...
It's just the number of seconds.
Yeah, exactly. You're literally saying, whatever happens to this element, I want it to happen slowly. I don't want to just jump, right? That's all you're saying. So you don't have to understand more than that, because you will use transitions, especially for things like buttons, right? Like, you know, if you look at websites right now, well, I don't know if there are buttons. Well, this one is jumping now. But if you look at most of the websites right now, they will ease into like color changes and stuff like that. Even if it's just for a 100 milliseconds, they will do that because it just gives you a little bit better feeling as a user. So you will be using transitions for that, but you know,
would you be typically using like existing libraries, or would you be creating your own little design?
You would be, well, it's a good question. You would be...
I guess you can adapt an existing template that you get from a library. Yeah.
I mean, you would be using most of the times. I would say, well, most of the times you will be using some kind of styling framework like Bootstrap or Material UI or something like that. But you would still be writing these yourself a lot of time because you would want to kind of customize it to whatever your design is, right? They have kind of predefined designs, and you would want to customize it. But it is a good question. If you work on bigger, if you work on small project that you want to do quickly, you would use something like Bootstrap, because they will basically, if I show you Bootstrap, I don't know if you've seen it before.
No.
So Bootstrap is basically a UI. What do they call themselves? They don't have an explanation. So Bootstrap is kind of like a UI framework, let's say, to do stuff. And you put this style sheet on your website, which is the Bootstrap style sheet, and then that gives you all the classes that you need to create websites, right? So to create the layouts. So why don't they show? Let me just see. So if you do components, right? So here you go. So if you put a Bootstrap library into your website, you can do all this right out of the box. You don't have to write a single line of CSS. You can already put this on your page. You can put these alerts. You can put badges like this. You can do input groups. You know, this kind of styling of inputs you will get out of the box with Bootstrap. So if you're working on a project and you want to get it out very quickly, and you don't necessarily care about how it looks, because it looks kind of like a standard thing that you can find online, then you would use something like this, because you would just save literally like weeks of work. And this would be your markup. So they would give you all the classes, and you would just apply them to the elements. So for what we call prototyping, you would use something like this. If you work on a bigger, more kind of more involved project and stuff, you might go with like a full-blown framework for UI, which is, for example, for React, there is Material UI. And again, it's basically the same thing like Bootstrap, but it will give you the JavaScript with it as well. So, well, Bootstrap does give JavaScript as well, but this is more sophisticated. So, let's look at here. So you see, like in Material UI, you have all these components, buttons and badges and avatars and all that stuff, and they will be somehow formatted already for you, and you can then just use them on your website. And again, you can customize it. You can change your transition times and all the stuff, but you would be using something like this, because writing this layout, if you just look at what we are looking at now, this like list of badges with a number beside them, where is it? Here. Writing this kind of layout is not hard, but you will spend some time doing that, right? So if you use this kind of framework, they will just give you, you will just put this markup on your website, and this is how it's going to look like. So Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
so there are systems like this. Obviously, everything has its downside. So we've been using this Material UI in my last project, and it was driving me crazy for a couple of reasons. But there is no denying that it's gonna make you more productive, basically, because you have stuff out of the box. It really depends on companies. Some companies will straight say, like, we don't want to use any kind of framework, UI framework. You just need to write everything by yourself. That's fair enough.
And these frameworks, so for example,
yeah,
in this case, do they have like a copyright, or can you just
everything that I'm showing you is you can use it as much as you want. Is free.
All right.
They have MIT license, so you can use it for commercial products as well. There are products that you can buy, that you pay them money and then you can reuse it in commercial product. But like, honestly, I haven't seen any that would be so good that I would feel like you have to pay for it. Most of these frameworks, like the Material UI, for example, is a full-blown framework. You install it and you use it, and that's it. But like Bootstrap is more of a starter, right? It will give you the start. You install it, it will give you the start, and then you build on top of it. You create your own styles. You kind of change it somehow or whatever. You extend it. Material UI is more like, they actually have themes in Material UI where you define your colors and stuff, and then it will change the whole framework, and you don't have to do anything. While Bootstrap is more, you kind of build on top of it. So I am more inclined to these kind of starters. So you install these starter library. Well, I don't know if you can call them libraries, but starter projects, and then you build on top of that. You can even see in here, Vasil, as great, like we have this normalized CSS. Normalized CSS is one of these MIT license, is one of these starters, right? So what does it mean, normalized CSS? In every browser, if you start writing a website, it will look slightly different in every browser and on every platform. Because if you just place an H1, so if you just do, if in here, if in here, I put H1 in there and I say hello world, this will look slightly differently. Where's my hello world? Oh. So this title will look slightly differently on all the different browsers and platforms. They will have different font sizes by default, they will have different colors by default, different fonts, and so on. So normalize is one of those starters that you can install to your project that basically normalizes everything across browsers, right? So it will apply some kind of style to all known elements, so they look exactly the same on every browser, right? So that's, you can see that's very useful, right? Because then you actually know what you're working with. So you know that this H1, how it looks like in here, that is how it's going to look like on Firefox, Opera, Internet Explorer, Edge, everywhere else. And then you can apply your styles on top of that, and you can be confident that that's how it's going to look like on everywhere else. So these things are very useful, and they will be things that you will end up using most of the time. Rather than full-blown frameworks, you're going to be using these kind of little helpers, basically. If that makes any sense. Yep. Okay. Anything else about transitions? No. Let's move to keyframes and animations then. So keyframes and animations. Animations are basically the most complex kind of UI changes that you can do in CSS. Obviously, we had the transition where you kind of animate stuff, but with animation, it's not changing the properties of the element, but actually moving the element around the page or animating it somehow. So you can do anything you want with animation, really. You can move the thing around. You can change it if you want to. and you can define your keyframe. So you can literally say, okay, from 0% to 50%, I want something to happen, and I want it to be this. And from 50% to 100%, I want something to happen here. So, for example, with transition, you will say, in 1 second, I want all this to happen, right? So if you go back to transition, let me just get rid of this. In 1 second, this is our transition. But you can see as I move out from the element, it will do the same thing. I mean, it will revert back to the initial state, right? You cannot actually control that. With animation, you can control what happens throughout the whole journey of the animation, and you can also create animation that goes for an hour. It's up to you. So yeah, so what we can do with animation, just some examples. I mean, animations are things that are very hard to learn, teach, because you need to find your specific application, what you want to do, and then do the animation for it, right? So, and I will show you another very cool starter for animations, for CSS animations. So in here we have, let me just open the animations. Right, so the first one, keyframes element in here, you can see we have keyframes element, so we have keyframes item. So if you find it in here, keyframe item. Right now it's not doing anything. If we actually enable the animation, what we're saying is, we want this to be animated. We want to use this keyframe, so this is basically the definition of the animation, what we want to happen. So if we go to move around, this is our keyframes move around, and we're saying from 0% of the animation to 25%, we want to do this translation. Then from 50, we want to do this translation, and from 200, we want to do this translation. This translate means that it's going to move, right? So what we were saying before, it will translate the position of the element to somewhere else. So it will go from it will stay from it will go from 0 to 50%, and from 50% to 0, and so on and so on and so on. And this is definition of what should happen. So again, 5 seconds, how long the animation takes. What is the timing function, like we had with the transition? What is the delay? This is how many times should this happen. So you can actually specify how many times should animation happen. In this case, we wanted to just do infinite. If we want to reverse, so direction of the animation, we want it to go from 0 to 100 or from 100 to 0, and so on. You have all these things. Running means what is the animation status. The fill mode, honestly, I don't actually even know what it is. You can find it on documentation again. So now if we enable this animation, so I uncommented it, and we refresh the page, you will see what this is going to be doing. So look, this element is now animating, so basically is now going around the page like this. So it's translating from one position to another as we defined in here. And this will go infinitely, so this will just keep going. So now, if you think about it, we have just created kind of GIF just in CSS, right? We have now animation that keeps going, and yeah, no interaction, nothing. It just started, right? Yeah, so that's this one. We can change the.
If we look at the HTML for that page,
Yeah.
The round thing with the words keyframe inside of it, is that an image, or is that also something built with CSS?
It's just another div.
Oh, it's just CSS?
Yeah.
So there's no image in there?
No.
Okay.
So this is just another element, which is div in this case.
Will that behave the same in the mobile?
Yeah.
So it's thinking about compatibility with mobiles. It's probably easier to handle CSS than dealing with an image.
If you can, yes. I mean, if you have if you have something that you can animate, that you could do. Again, what I said with the loaders, right? So if you look at what this is doing, it's kind of going round and round. So if you have a loader on your page, it would be easier to do it with CSS animation than with image, because with image you would have to include the image, it would be bigger, and blah 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 blah. With CSS, it's just a couple of lines of code. And if you look at this, we actually, that's what we're doing in here, right? We're going around circle. So if you think about it, this could be a loader. This is already an example of loader. Again, if you just search for CSS loaders, there will be some kind of app online that will let you generate your own loaders. Look, this is all CSS, right? This is no images, which is kind of amazing if you think about it. Like, for example, this heart. If you look at the source, this is the source for the heart, and all you're doing is you're putting div on a page, and this is your code how to animate it. So that's all you this is all you can achieve with CSS. Great thing about this is you can scale it, you can color it. If I press this, look, they change in color. You can do anything you want with it, really. While with image, obviously, it's much harder, because if you want to change image, you would have to re-upload the image and so on. So you can achieve quite crazy things with it, but obviously it all depends, because there is very fine line between what you need to achieve and what you can actually achieve with CSS. So you will have designers coming to you and they will be saying, like, this is what we want, and you will try to recreate it with CSS, and very often it happens that you will get 99% of the way, but you will just be missing that one part that can be done only with image. So then you need to decide, like, can we compromise, or can we actually just leave it as it is, and just being happy with how it looks like at that point. So yeah, it's a very fine line between what you can achieve with image and without image. So this is this one. So literally the difference, you can think of it as a transition, but the difference is you don't need any trigger. So like in here, we're using the hover as a trigger. In here, in the animation, we're just literally saying we want this item, which is this div, to animate. So you just literally starting the animation on the page load. Let's look at further. There's a mention. So you can pause the animation as well. You can change its play state, but in that case, you already need some kind of action. So in this case, hover. So if this animation will be going, if I hover over the element, it will stop animating. And if I go away from it, it will start animating again. Right? So you can play with it as well. You can see that we are already achieving quite, let's say, crazy things without JavaScript, right? Like we are animating something, when you point at it, it will stop, and then it will resume animation. So you are right at the edge of between CSS and JavaScript in this case. But animations are pretty much as complex as you will get with CSS. Anything more than that, you will have to use JavaScript. Right. So this is the first animation. Now there is a lot of examples in here that I can show you. So we have this is basically like a showcase of different timing functions, the thing that we were talking about before. So again, we have one element in here that's kind of the background, and then we have this little square in it that will be animating. So if I go through them, they are set up so when I start hovering on them, they will start animating. So if I go through them, you'll see that this is the easing, this is the ease, well, this is the easing, this is the ease in. So it goes from the beginning, and it will kind of ease into the animation. Ease out means it will start quickly, and then it will ease out from the animation. Ease in and out starts slowly, and then goes fast, and then slow again. Linear, just same constant animation. This is step. So you can see that this has two steps, right? This is one step at the beginning, one step at the end. So even though this is an animation, it just appears on the front and then in the back. It doesn't actually animate, which might be useful in some places. There is 5 steps in here, so it goes like this, back and forth. So this animation, if you look at, well, I will show you the setup. All these elements are exactly the same. Okay, they're all exactly the same. They all have animation timing track, and each of them has timing track 1, 2, 3, 4, just to change the timing method. And each of them inside has these track item. So they are the same markup apart from this number. And if you look at the CSS, we apply something to the track, something to the track item, and then for each of them, we just apply different timing function. Oh, there's a typo. Yeah, so they are set up exactly the same way, just with different timing action. And if you look at the actual animation, the animation is called slide. If you look at the keyframes, starts from the left, then it goes to the end minus 50 pixels because that's the size of the box, I assume, and then it goes back to 0. Okay, so you're actually telling the animation, you go from one side to the other side, and then you go back. If you delete this, if you delete this, and just put 100% in here, which is the end of the animation, then it should animate only one way, right? So it goes to the left, to the right, and just stays there, and then it starts from the start. You see? So if you look at the steps, the steps, these ones, it will go to the end, and it will start again from the beginning. It's not going back. If we put it back as it was, so it starts from, oh, I lost it. Starts at the beginning of the application, it starts on the left, then halfway through the animation, it goes to the end, so it goes all the way to the right, and at the end of the application, it will go to the left. So you're basically saying go to the end and then go back to the left, right? That's why it's going back and forth with different effects. Yeah, so we were at the steps, so the steps go here and then go back. There's 10 steps, so you can make it faster. And then there is the custom one. So that's what I was showing you, that little tool that you can create your custom animations. You see, it goes really fast to the middle, then it kind of slows down, and then it goes fast to the end. And it kind of bounces at the end as well. So you can do whatever you want with the animations, really. They are really, really flexible. And these keyframes, they are good for defining whatever happens. So, you know, I can say at the 50% mark, change your background to red. I think that should work, actually. So you see, once it passes 50%, we'll change red. Okay, so we can say at the beginning it's green. Actually, we can do even more stuff. So we can say at 75% change red, at 50% change to orange, and then at 0% change to sorry, oh, now I lost it. Change back to green. So it will kind of go, starts with green, goes to red, and then goes back to green. Right? So it goes like this. I mean, obviously it's not kind of even how it changes the color. I would have to add more steps, but at least you can see what you can do. So you can literally tell it to whatever needs to be done. It's very, very flexible. It's almost like every of these steps is its own transition, if you think about it. Let me just check what we have in here. So the keyframes controls the intermediate steps in a CSS animation sequence by defining styles for keyframes. This is taken from MDN. This is how you define keyframes. We were just showing that. Again, the animation can be written out by each of these keys. So once because we wrote it in here, actually let's look at this one. Because we wrote it in here like this, each of those can be written as its own key. So it can be animation, interaction, count, animation, direction, animation, fill mode, and so on.
Thomas, can you go back to the slide you had?
Which one?
No, the previous one. The one with the colors, moving things.
Oh, you mean this one?
Yeah. Okay. Is there any way that I'm looking at the image and I'm just thinking about the light blue lines, as if they were a div or a paragraph or something, so that whatever it says is, for example, it is the content of it. Can something like this be done, and this being that the is and the is in and is out, all of those could could change places for whatever reason? Like if I make a click on something and then I want the is to be located between the is in and is out instead of just being the first one.
Oh, you mean this whole thing? If you can have is between is in and stuff like that, you could potentially do it, but you would probably do that with JavaScript. That's already getting into more kind of complex stuff. I mean, you could potentially do it, but very if you want to do it just in CSS, you would have to limit it quite a lot, because you can specify how they go one after each other, but it would be more like how they break and stuff like that. If you want to actually change them, so if you want to say, I want to reorder these, you would be using JavaScript.
Yeah, it's reorder. It's a word that
so if you would usually, if you have this kind of list, right? Usually you would have some kind of icon in here that you would take it and you would drag it down to here. That's JavaScript. You can't do that with CSS, because then you would be saying in JavaScript, if you think pseudocode kind of thing, you would be saying, take this element and take it from this position in my DOM and move it into 7th position in my DOM or something. So it would kind of re-render the DOM rather than doing.
That's exactly, you just gave me the answer. That's exactly what I need to do.
Yeah. So that's you would have to do that in JavaScript. Right. So how do the animations look like? I think they are pretty cool. Any questions? No. Right. Let's move on to the last two things. They are not as complex, so we're gonna kind of slide through them. This is all the animations. Sorry, the animation timing functions. I'm kind of skipping through it because you will have the slides, so you can read it later. But this is basically everything that I've shown you, with the timing functions and the steps and so on. The fill mode, I will be honest with you, I don't even know what it is. It's target before and after its execution. Yeah, so it sets how CSS animation applies styles to its target before and after its execution. So it will apply the styles, if I understand it correctly, it will apply the styles either before or after the execution of that step. So yeah, you can just have a little bit more granular control over how it looks like when it's animating. You can say if it goes backwards or forwards or both. Animation direction, you can go either from 0% to 100%, or you can go from 100% to 0%. And then the play state, you can have either running or paused. So if it's actually running or if it's pausing. Again, there are some kind of websites that will give you more introduction into what happens. So you can see they will give you different kind of examples what you can do with animations. The one thing that I will show you though, because it's very useful. I mean, obviously, yeah, look, like you can do all sorts of stuff. Look at that. So this is all CSS. What you can do with CSS, different animations, and you can apply this. So you can see now, there's like a flipping of element and stuff. You can apply these animations. You can apply to any element in HTML, right? Be it an input or a button or div or anything like that. You can apply it to anything. There is a there's a really nice, this one I think it is. Yeah, so this is a CSS file that you can download, and it has all these animations pre-built. So what you need to do in your code is just use these classes, put it to your element, and it will somehow animate. So for example, there's bounce, look, nice bounce animation, flash, rubber band, look at that, shake, all sorts of crazy animations that you can do, which is quite nice for, again, for websites that actually need that, right? Fades, there's something, light speed in right. See, this probably reminds you a lot, like creating slides, creating slideshows and stuff, because it looks a lot like that. So yeah, so you can find these kind of libraries, and it is just one style sheet. There's no JavaScript. You just add this style sheet to your code, and then you just add a class that they will tell you which class to add, and it will be animating in your browser. So that's really cool. These are the kind of helpers that I was talking about. Rather than writing all these animations yourself, you can just import this project, and they are quite well maintained as well. Right. So now to the background. Unless there's any questions about animations, I will just go on the background. I know we are out of time, so if you can just stand by a little bit, I will show you a couple of things and we are done. So backgrounds, have you done any backgrounds with images in CSS before?
Yeah, so on our land page project, we had to do a background image, yeah.
Okay, great. So with background, you can use different positions as well. So if you look at this, so if you look at background attachment, you can do local, fixed, and other stuff, which you have described in here. So you can, each of them has different behavior. So if you have background attachment, which is scrolling, so this is by default where you scroll and the background kind of scrolls with it. Fixed is where the background stays in one place and just your content is scrolling, and the local is where it actually scrolls with the content. And again, depends very much on your application. So if you look at the different ones, so here you have the scroll, so you're scrolling your content, right? Here you have the fixed where it stays in one place, and as you scroll, this is the kind of parallax effect that everybody's talking about. So if you scroll kind of through your page, the image stays in one place and it kind of appears and disappears. And then you have the local one where it just kind of stays in one place, stays with the content. These ones, there's not much to say about them. It's just different ways that the backgrounds behave, and all you have to do is just kind of try it out, really. You can change the size as well. So if you look at this local one, for example, if I change the size to 50%, then the background is going to be different size. If I change it to 400%, then it will zoom into here. It goes from the center, but you can also do, you should be able to do background position. And you can say it's going to be top left, for example. So now if I refresh it, it actually zooms in. So if you look at the image, this is now the background that we're having in there. So if I make it a little bit smaller, you can see now the kind of the size is now calculated from the top left point rather than from the center. So if you can also say I want to go on a y axis, I want to go from the center, but on the x I want to go from the top, so from the left, sorry. So it goes like this and so on. So you can play with it as much as you want. These ones there is no kind of like interactivity to it. You just basically try them and see what works for your own use case. So that's the backgrounds. I don't know if you have any questions to that, because this one is a bit yeah, it's just very basic. Any questions? No?
No, no questions for me. Thank you.
And then we have filter. So filter is a very cool thing that has been added to CSS not that long time ago as well. And filters are basically what you would find, let's say, on Instagram. So I'm pretty sure that everybody knows Instagram, and you can take image and you can add any kind of filter to it. So you can do blur, brightness, contrast, hue rotation, hue rotate, sorry, and all these kind of things, saturation, sepia, and stuff. So these are kind of pre-built into the browser. Again, you will see a website that have many more, but then they might be using JavaScript, right? So these ones are the ones that are pre-built in the browser. If you want to use something more complex, you will have to use JavaScript for that. So just to show you a little bit, here's the picture. If we now enable the blur, let's do this one. Oh, it's not working before right now. Sorry, I didn't try this once before the class, so just need to check how it's done. Oh, sorry, it's on hover. Yeah. Oh, it's on hover. Yeah, sorry. So if I don't know why. Anyway, if I hover over it, you see it will blur out the picture. So you can achieve quite cool effects with it. Let's put it back to 4. Probably look a little bit better. There you go. So that's blur. Let's do some nice ones. So for example, grayscale, right? So you can see.
What is the before? What is the before after the hover?
So the before is because so this filter, that's our element, this word filter, and then before is where we actually put the background image. Okay, so this puppy is actually before this element. Have you done before or after before? No. So every element can have before or after, which is kind of pseudo element, and you can style it somehow as well. I am pretty sure if you haven't done it yet, then you will have like a specific lecture on that, because they are quite useful, especially for icons and other stuff. So if you imagine every element on the page, let me just show you here. So if I now inspect this, right? So we have div, and you see like this filter has a before. This div has a before as well. It's just not there because we're not using it, but this kind of before is just giving developers a little bit of more flexibility. So if you're saying, I have this element, but I want something to happen before or after the element, and not necessarily having to add a new element in there. So you can use that to achieve some kind of effects. In this case, he's using it to display the image and add the filter on it. So it's just another way of doing it. You could probably do the image in in a separate element as well, but for some reason right now it's on before.
So if you were to do filter hover before, or if you were doing it over before the image, then you would have you would add an image or an element. That element would be just before it, right?
Yeah, you could but you could add element in here that would basically be the background. I think it's just because he wanted to have just one element, but you could have a background on this as well. So I'm actually not sure why is it before. Maybe I'm missing something in here. I'm not sure.
I think we used it in our landing page. So basically, we had a menu with different kind of topics, and one of the menu items had like a red or green underlining on, and I think Vasil like just used that after parameter to actually add that little line.
Yeah, I think it's just honestly I don't know, but I think it's because he wanted to center it somehow or something like that. It's not necessary. You can see I removed it before, so now we have just filter with the background image and filter on hover. And if I actually, now it's obviously full size, and if I hover over it, it will have the effect anyway. It was probably unnecessary complication, but it's fine. Like it just looked a little better, but yeah, it was probably just something about positioning. So yeah, again, it will go gray. So that's another really cool thing that you can do, because you could potentially do the filter in here. Right, so you can say when it's actually loaded, it will be gray, and then when you hover over it, you could clear the filter. So you would say filter none. So you can see this on a lot of websites as well. So they will have like a list of logos, for example. They will be all grayed out, and then when you hover over them, they will suddenly be colored. That's a neat effect, right? That you can do. Again, this is actually, for you as a newcomer, is probably not as amazing, but for me, like when I was doing this, say 5 years ago, I had to have two images. One was colored, one was not colored, and when you hover over it, it switched the images to create this kind of effect. But now you can just do it with CSS. You just have one image and apply filter to it. It's really, really simple comparing to what it used to be. What would be the other cool one? Saturation. You can actually change the colors of the image as well. Well, I mean the saturation. Sepia, I think this is the kind of like adds a little bit of drama to it. Yeah, something like that. So yeah, there are a couple of effects that you can use. I'm not sure how many there are exactly. You use this only in very, very specific cases. So there's a function as well. Right. So you can even chain them. So you can do sepia and drop shadow at the same time or something like that. Interestingly enough, which I didn't know, you can actually create your filter in SVG and then apply it as a URL. So you can have 100% custom filters as well, which is really useful. Yeah. So again, in documentation, you can see all the possible filters. Does filter make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Right, and the last thing to look at, we have the text gradient. You can, as you probably already know, you can do gradients on the background. So you can say, like we have in here. If you look at here, we say this background should be a linear gradient from on some kind of angle, and then you will give it a list of colors. Text gradient is not possible out of the box with CSS, but what you can do something a little bit smart, where you basically clip the background to the text, and then you say clip the background to the content. So this is the content, so the background is going to be only there. Let me just show you. Right, so now the background is only where the letters are, only where the content is. And now, just to show the background, because it's still black, we can actually make the color transparent on the text, and that will basically do that. So you literally you applying a background of linear gradient on the whole element which is behind the text. then you're saying clip the background just to the text, right, to the content. So the background will disappear from everywhere else, just the text. And then making the color of the text transparent, so it actually shows the gradient. And this is a great example of when I'm saying try hard to achieve something with CSS, right? Because normally you would say, well, text gradient is not possible in browser. Let's just put image in there. But CSS is in one way is so flexible that you can apply all these different random rules together to achieve something really, really cool, right? So it's really up to you kind of looking at it and thinking, how could I achieve this? And I'm pretty sure that you can even, you could kind of Google like, text gradient CSS, let's try it. So, and somebody must have done it before, and it will show you how to do it. Yeah, so if you Google things like this, it will actually show you how to do that. So it will show you the background, linear, and then clip the text, and then make the text transparent. So, there's a lot of stuff that you can achieve in CSS that you wouldn't think even that you can achieve, but you really can. I can show you one. I'm not actually sure if I can find it now, but let me just try it quickly. Yeah. Right, so this is something that I actually done about 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. So it's been where the CSS has been not as cool as now. But if you look at this is just a HTML element, and all the styling in here on this icon is achieved by CSS, right? So there's no JavaScript, there are no images involved in this. And look how complex it is. It has these kind of lines going on there. It has a gradient on the background. It has these 3 dots in there and all that stuff. This is all just HTML and CSS. There is actually I even created CodePen for it. I don't even remember this anymore. So like you can achieve really cool things in CSS. So try to first, when you approach some new problem, try to first think about how could you do it in CSS. Do a little bit of Googling, and then you can if you still can't achieve it, then you can actually decide to go, okay, I will go JavaScript or images or something like that. This is the original, right? So it still looks different, but what I've done is close enough for designer to kind of say, okay, you can use this. You don't have to do it in images, and it saves a lot of bandwidth to not having to download these images and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, so I think those are filters and text gradient, and I think that's it for today, unless you have some questions, and please do ask me before we go.
And I want to see your code for this CSS logos you did.
Well, I wouldn't look at it too much because it's been a long time ago, so it's probably absolutely horrible. But I will send you the link, and you can have a look at it. But
no, I will have a look. Yeah.
It's just like it's just an example that you can do all crazy stuff with it. I'm sure you could achieve it easier.
It's exciting, like how much you can do. It's just limitless. There's no limits to it.
But like when I still remember when I was doing this, there was a lot of Googling, right? I was Googling how can I do 2 backgrounds on top of each other, and how can I do a background that has these kind of lines rather than actual solid colors, right? So there is a lot of stuff that you just will have to Google, or like maybe you will be able to think of it. I'm probably not as smart to just think of it out of my from the top of my head, but there will be people who've done it already. And if you just take little pieces from here and there, I'm not telling you to copy paste stuff, but if you just look at other people's code and think about it, you will be able to piece it together in a sense that that will basically create some kind of result. Right. I'm happy to answer anything, unless, I mean, if you have any questions, let me know. Other than that, we will call it a day.
All good here.
Yeah. Does it make sense?
A lot of things that are good to know from
Yes.
my perspective. Thomas was asking probably more about the real use of it, and it really depends. Like Thomas says at the beginning, like for Christina, those are very important things when taking into consideration the design to make.
Yeah.
For me, really, I'm more into like making the app work. So I need to get the data, go to the database, get it saved, and how it looks, well, somebody will do that.
Yeah, exactly. So like for you, probably wireframes and maybe even a transition or something like that here and there will be important, but like doing animations and stuff, probably not.
Yeah, the concepts, I use them on daily basis with my clients. Like, okay, let me get you a mock-up, and this is going to be like this is going to be an image, this is going to be a slider. Okay, yeah, but I'm not the one who making things move, right? I'm just getting the login, connecting to the database, and the fun part.
Yeah, exactly. But like it's good to know anyway, and to be honest, like these things are so specific for whatever you need to achieve that, like, I can tell you for myself, if I suddenly tomorrow, if I get a project which will be like a crazy cool promo for a new TV or something like that, then I will be going and I will be refreshing all my knowledge on this as well, because I don't remember half of it. Like you just can't keep up with remembering absolutely everything, right? So it's not something that you need to know by heart. I would say, we did together like loops and events and stuff like that. Those are things that you need to know inside out in your sleep. But this is the things that you kind of play with. This is the playful part, basically, that you can just like sit around and play with it until it just resembles something that you want it to do. So that's, but it's exciting. It's exciting to see stuff in the browser move around and do change colors and stuff like that. It's cool.
Yep, I agree.
All right. Any questions? No?
No.
No? All right. Well, have a nice evening. Sorry that it took too long. It was quite a lot of stuff to go through. I hope it all makes sense, and if not, just ping me and I can explain more. Obviously, I recorded everything, so I will upload it so you can watch it again if you need to.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.